out of all the blades in my collection, the one I actually have the most experience with is the smallest. It's my Micro Recon from Cold Steel. So here's some usage footage. Meat slicing and processing, it would do a little better if it was a clip instead of a Tonto point, but the grippy G10 helped control cuts, and I found it to be very easy to be precise with because it's so small that your finger is, it's just close to the tip. It's kind of similar with this Mora Eldris, but the Mora Eldris definitely has a little more shearing potential, and then just that much more when you look at the Cold Steel Finn Wolf. Obviously that one has more shearing, a higher Scandi grind, and it does really well. Next up, a little bit of spoon craft. I do a lot of spoon carving, and I had this really hard piece of apple wood. The blade is actually quite effective, but with my extra large sized hands, the handle is a little bit of a weak point. It's not the most comfortable. It's hard to push through this really dry, hard piece of apple wood, and you can kind of tell as I'm working with it. It's just hard to get a lot of force behind that edge because you can only hold on to a couple inches of handle, and so your other fingers really aren't doing anything. You can only squeeze the knife so tight because it's not really wide, and that's not a complaint. It's a great keychain knife. It's just something I noticed that when you're actually working with it to push through some really hard media, you have a limited amount of ability if you have large size hands. I think people with small size hands are still going to find the same thing to be true. So obviously the Cold Steel Finn Wolf, the blade itself is designed, really for woodworking. It's a Scandi, and it's a true Scandi right now, the way that I've sharpened it up. The thing is, the handle, again, is just not comfortable. It's very thin. It's not that much thicker than the Micro Recon, and it's got that gap where your fingers kind of dig in. The scales are a little bit sharp. It's a great blade. It's AUS 8 as well, but handle is just not comfortable. And that's where you're going to see the Mora Eldris shine, because it's a very small, short knife as far as the blade is concerned and the handle, but the handle is nice and round. It's quite warm to the touch, but it doesn't give you hot spots, and it's got that gummy texture, no gap where a folding knife would have on the underside, and so obviously the advantage is going to go to the Mora Eldris in this one. When it comes to material removal, just in general, taking big chunks out of cardboard or wood, kind of doesn't matter what it is. Actually, it's really impressive for such a small blade, and the grind that it comes with the factory. Mine is slightly modified, but even with that factory grind, it takes quite a chunk out of wood, I found, and that was a hard piece of wood right there. Now, comparatively, you try to compare that against the Finn Wolf here. The Finn Wolf, there's more shearing capability. It's got a true Scandi, comes down to that zero grind. And obviously there's a longer blade there to kind of ride through the wood or pull through the wood. But actually, I really think the Micro Recon did nearly as well on this little piece of wood. And then the Mora Eldris, the handle is just a huge advantage. It's so much more capable because of the handle. Almost exclusively, the handle itself is really the best part about that blade. It's very comfortable and allows you to get a good, for me, even with my XL size hands, a 4-finger purchase, and I can do a lot better work just having that round handle. Okay, when it comes to feather sticks, it worked fantastic actually, but only for thinner slices. If you can see, I'm working with this about 2-inch wide piece. Your hand tends to run into the wood, and it kind of rubs against your knuckles. You might get some slivers because of that short blade length, but if you can tell, even with this, working the corner of it, it still gives adequate feathers. I think if I had a piece of wood that didn't have so many little ridges in it, I think I actually could have pulled out really, really nice feathers with the blade today, because I've seen that in the past. It's very, very capable for feather sticks. It's just something you have to deal with, that short handle and a little shorter blade. Obviously the clip point would, again, probably do a little better. The Finn Wolf, that thing is just built for doing feather sticks like what I'm doing right here. It is not a challenge. It's very natural, outside of the fact that, once again, I'll say that Finn Wolf handle It's great for carrying in the pocket. It's not great for using for extended periods of time. You know, if you're just going to use it for a little bit, kind of like what I'm doing here, it's not too bad. Makes some nice feathers, but the curls, even that hurts your hand after quite a while of working with the blade. If you can see, it digs in quite a bit on the back, as well as on my fingers there. It did dig in pretty bad, and it's just kind of sharp scales, thin scales, extra large hand. Carries well in the pocket, but not so well in the hand after a while. The Eldris, once again, the Eldris is going to be, you know, just, it's not even fair to compare it against the Eldris. I'm just kind of showing you what other blades would do. And this has a similar sized blade, just a little bit longer, but it's, again, built for this kind of thing. The only limitation for the Eldris in this case would also be that blade length. You can't get very far away from the wood, so sometimes your knuckles run into it, and you can't really do it on a big piece of wood. Alright, so when it comes to push cuts, the short handle was really the only thing I noticed. Once again, that G10. By this point, the thin, rough scales are kind of chewing up my hands, but I needed a little bit of extra grip for control. And again, I think, in my opinion, the clip version probably has the advantage here over the Tonto. If you can kind of see, I'm having just a little bit of an awkward point right there where a clip would have done probably a little better. The Finn Wolf has no problem doing stuff like that. It's a nice Scandi, and you know, it's not even as sharp as it should be actually, and it's still no problem. Not really comfortable in the hand, but chews into that wood just fine. The Eldris, again, the only disadvantage here is going to be that blade length. It's not really long, and so sometimes your hand itself gets in the way, or the wood. Chews into the wood, takes nice bites, and splits the wood decently well in this case. It's a hard piece of pine, actually. You can see a little comparison there between how similar those blades are and the size. Okay, push cut number 2. I just wanted to see, after rocking a blade back and forth a little bit, how would they stand up against each other? And I'll admit right off the bat, with the Eldris and the Cold Steel here, obviously it took more effort. It definitely took more effort to get that Micro Recon into the wood, but I noticed that after applying effort, they pretty much all did similarly. The Finn Wolf is a little deeper, the Micro Recon maybe a little more shallow, but pretty close. It really did pretty well, all things considered. Okay, so I moved on to a credit card now, old Sam's Club card, and these are kind of hard to cut the way I am because they're so thin, and that blade isn't super thin behind the edge, and so it did resist just a little bit pushing it in, but credit cards are not easy to cut through, and it does just fine. It's really, really capable for this sort of thing, EDC task, cutting zip ties and all that. The Eldris, which I expected to not do amazingly well, I probably performed about the same, except for the fact that it has a longer handle, a little more purchase area for me. As far as cutting itself, probably was not that much better. Finn Wolf, I didn't have a lot of card left over to cut here, so kind of risky on the first cut, and I got to the second cut and I was like, nope, not going to try that again. So I just clipped it a few times. Easy enough. Hand is getting sore by this point because of that uncomfortable handle though. Next, I wanted to gouge kind of like a bow drill divot, sort of like that. Just some sort of awl task, you know, if you've ever worked with a wood awl before. And the Tonto actually did pretty well. I was quite content with its ability to gouge. The thing is, it's got great strength. What I would say about the Micro Recon and the Finn Wolf, both of them, is that they are so strong. There's no side-to-side blade play. They just really shine and outshine all other knives I've ever used that are folding knives. When you're putting that side pressure on there, and even a little flex on a lot of fixed blades, you'll feel that. But with these, very solid lockup, no blade play whatsoever. And the Eldris, that one can flex a little better because it's such a thin blade stock, and it's a fixed blade, and fixed blades, you just kind of expect that they do best at something like this. The Eldris was made for these types of tasks. does pretty well. So if you've ever seen Morris Cahancy's tri-stick, kind of sort of doing a little bit of a tri-stick with this, or at least my version of a little notch, making a little wood diamond. Just something where I can kind of test and assess either how hard a piece of wood is or how sharp my knife is, or both. In this case, it was kind of both, because it was a very dense piece of wood I found. Hard maple, dried maple. The Tonto edge actually had a bit of an advantage as I was working with it, because it gave me almost like a chisel effect, where I could push that into the wood, and for crafting it was more capable than I thought it would be. It did pretty well. It was very controllable in the hand. Again, the G10 is not that comfortable. It didn't feel great in my hand because it's so small, but could it do it? Absolutely, it could do it, and not that much longer than a bigger blade like this Finwolf here. The Finwolf, again, it's kind of made for this thing. It's got a longer blade, but that wasn't necessarily an advantage in this case. You can kind of tell that it still took a similar amount of time, and the extra blade, I'm not using that much of it functionally. I'm just kind of reinforcing with a thumb there. It's the same thing I could have done with a smaller blade. So as far as a small notch, or kind of what I'm doing crafting here, not a huge advantage with a bigger blade. The place where there is an advantage is in a better handle. And you're not going to make a keychain knife that looks like the Eldris, I understand that. It's not a fair comparison at all. But the Eldris certainly has the most comfortable handle. It's a little thinner behind the edge with that kind of dual grind Scandi. And obviously at Tastic, it's going to excel. It is quite a bit faster than using that Micro Recon, and of course it's way more comfortable. A little more shearing power, a little thinner to kind of make snappy cuts out of there. In fact, you can tell that I cut through the piece of wood right there, all the way through. Almost sliced my hand horribly bad, but I didn't. Batoning, the longer blade has the advantage, the thicker blade has a little advantage, but believe it or not, the Micro Recon handles it pretty well. That was like a 1.5 inch piece of wood, I think, and as long as there's a nub hanging out there, it split just fine. No extra abuse on the blade, really. It handles it quite well. I know this looks stupid to do with such a small knife, but if you were just making some kindling, it really, really does well. Now stabbing, because there's not much of a handle there, yeah, you can't put a lot of force behind it. It doesn't have the most pointy tip either. I think my modified tip there might be part of the problem, but it just doesn't stab real well with such a small handle, and I didn't want to lose my fingers because it is really sharp, so I gave it a few tries. Compared to the Finwolf, there's no comparison. The Finwolf, obviously, I can get a lot more leverage and power behind that stab. Carrying in the pocket, it's so small you wouldn't even know it's there. This is like EDC Dream stuff. If you were actually going to pocket carry this, or you needed a small knife, that's ideal. The Finwolf, easier to deploy, obviously, but you can carry this on a keychain, which makes it win for me.